Are we in a recession? I'm Spencer Ford, certified financial planner with Conservative Financial Solutions, and today we're exploring recession or not a recession? 'Tis the question. Last week, it was reported that real GDP, which stands for gross domestic product, was negative 0.9%. Basically, gross domestic product is what you get when you add up the value of all finished goods and services a country produces over a specific period of time. Real gross domestic product is when it's adjusted for inflation, because as we know all too well lately, inflation can really eat away at your buying power. So it's important to add that into the equation. When we look at the goods and services produced along with inflation, the value of those goods and services produced has been declining overall. It's been declining now for 2 quarters. It was negative 1.6% in the first quarter of the year, and as I mentioned before, it was negative 0.9% in the second quarter of the year. And you've probably heard it said, especially in the news lately, that the definition of recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative real GDP. And whether or not you stick that definition seems to depend on which side of the political aisle you fall on, which makes it really difficult when you're really trying to get down to the facts and understand what's going on. So let's get to the facts. In everyday language, people understand a recession to be 2 negative quarters of GDP. But that isn't the full story. The National Bureau of Economic Research has a much broader definition of what a recession is. You can go to their website and look it up. They don't just take into consideration GDP because, as you can imagine, GDP can be a really weird metric given the fact that you're trying to measure and price all of the goods and services produced in a country at one time. GDP figures get revised all the time. So the National Bureau of Economic Research also takes into consideration income, spending, jobs. It's hard to call it a recession when we've had blooming job growth, industrial production that's up 5.2% and at an annualized rate over the first 6 months. Corporate earnings in the second quarter are showing revenue growth of 10% from a year ago, up 10% from a year ago. Profit is up 3% from a year ago, and 70% of companies that are reporting earnings right now are beating estimates. That's typically not what happens when you're in a recession. Brian Westbury is one economist I follow very closely. I like what he has to say a lot of times because he just gets down to brass tacks. He's a no-nonsense kind of guy, and here's what he had to say. We're living through unprecedented times. People call what happened in 2020 a recession. It wasn't. It was a lockdown, and we've never locked down the economy before. But if you think it was a recession, then now we've been in a recovery. But this hasn't been a recovery, it's been a reopening. Using normal words to describe the economy lately hasn't even made sense. Not only that, we've distorted all of the data. Retail sales are up 30% right now from where they were in February of 2020. Now, if we take that normal period and go pre-pandemic, we'd be up around 7 to maybe 8%. In other words, retail sales grew 4 to 5 times faster than normal. How is that possible when we lock down the economy? When we're in the middle of a pandemic. The only way that that's possible is by using our kids' credit cards. And what he's talking about there is the government stimulus that was paid out during the pandemic. He continues, remember, too, that during the pandemic, services were really hard to come by. Cruise ships, airlines, theaters, sporting events, all of those things. So everybody spent that money on goods. This year, in fact, we see it in the second quarter GDP data that goods spending was negative, but services spending was positive. And my belief is that all of these distorted numbers are going to leave us with no real recession this year, even though GDP data declined for the first 2 quarters of this year, so 2 quarters in a row. Profits will be up at the end of the year from where they were at the end of last year. Revenues will be up at the end of this year from where they were last year. The service side of the economy is what's going to keep growing and keep creating jobs throughout the rest of this year. End quote. He goes on to compare the economy to a car accident. Now, that's not particularly comforting, but basically 2020 was a car wreck and the economy came out with a broken leg. But then we pumped it full of morphine, i.e. cash, we're still living off of the fumes of that cash. People are still sitting on more money than what they had pre-pandemic, and they continue to pump that into the economy. But that cash is going to run out at some point in time. That morphine is going to wear off, which is why it's very likely that we're going to end up with an actual recession in the next 18 to 24 months. So the dark cloud is looming. So I want you to take the first half of this year as a warning. If you're uncomfortable with what happened in your portfolio through the beginning of 2022, it's probably time to sit down and have a conversation with your financial advisor and make some adjustments, because I believe that the worst is yet to come. Now, I'm not Dr. Doom. Overall, I'm bullish on the United States, but we go through periods of expansion and periods of contraction. That's natural. If you're young enough to weather the storm, great. Just dump some cash in when we hit the low spots and really take advantage of the opportunity. If you're nearing retirement, make sure you're protected and in a position to weather the storm in a way that it's appropriate for you. Again, I'm Spencer Ford with Conservative Financial Solutions, and we'll see you in the next video.